Hey all, I wanted to share a really quick practical video. This is something I was dealing with, but I wanted to swap in a serverless model for one of my just OpenAI requests, and I just kind of hit a couple of problems. But there's some really cool changes that just came up. So it makes it really easy now to swap in either a local LLM that you're running through Ollama on your own machine, or one of these serverless models, and they all use just the exact same OpenAI API. And so with a couple of overrides, you can just toggle between any one of these models on kind of your machine or serverless. It's super cool, but there are a couple gotchas to be aware of. So let me quickly just run through kind of how it works. But essentially, we're going to use just the existing OpenAI API, or LangChain is built on top of this, so it's going to work the exact same with LangChain if you use LangChain. But these kind of serverless options, like Together is what I'm going to demo today, they have the OpenAI API compatibility. So they can use that Python SDK, or I think there's a Node SDK as well that would probably work. So we can just make all the exact same requests, same structure as you would just calling the OpenAI API. Same thing, Ollama, which I use to run my local models. They just introduced OpenAI compatibility a few days ago, but do be aware it's very new, not fully supported yet, so they don't actually support function calling, so that's going to be something to be really aware of. And then finally, if you're using LangChain, if you're using Chat OpenAI, this is going to work similarly. We just need to override a few things. And so let me just demo really fast how to do this. Usually when we set up a project like this, and oh, quick caveat, I guess I put all this in GitHub, so if you want to play around with any of this code, see it in the comments below. But here we go. We usually just kind of specify the API key that we need, the OpenAI organization. So we need to pull those in from our environment file. And we have a base URL. This is what we'd be using if we want to make requests to OpenAI. Now, Ollama has the option we can make the requests directly to our local host where it's being served, and just specify the API key. And then further, if we're using one of the serverless models, we need to set that up. But this is if we're using Together, which I like, we set that base URL and then the API key here. And what we're going to do to actually use this, we've got a little bit of setup here to just have tools that exist and some messages just saying you're an assistant who can use functions and asking for the temperature. So I'm going to show this as an example here quickly. To make that request through the serverless option, we're just using the OpenAI setup. We're doing a chat completions request, and we can now just override that base URL, override the API key, and override the model. And by doing this, now as opposed to sending an OpenAI request, this is going to our serverless option. So this should work. The response should be the same. So we can kind of like swap this out really easily. And it even manages to do some parallel function calling here. Additionally, we can just stream the responses. So if we pass in stream with that same setup, we can print that out and get the streaming. So all of that is now working the same we would have been making the same requests to OpenAI. Now we're making it to Together, and we can swap in whatever model we want, and that's all going to be functionally the same. Um, do be aware that the models have to support the tool calling. So if we look in the documentation here for function calling in Together, there are really only these three today that are supported out of the box in the kind of OpenAI expectation of passing in that tool choice. Otherwise, you're going to have to go down some kind of like custom path where you're defining the output that you expect to be a function call and then checking to see if that's in the output. So if you want to use it kind of out of the box by just kind of listing the tools here, you're going to have to use one of these three models. Additionally, remember, OpenAI the Ollama does not support function calling yet, but I imagine that's going to come really soon. So if you wait a couple weeks, it'll probably appear. So streaming works. And then let me just show you here, I've got the same little request where I'm just going to be write some whimsical haikus about ducks. And we're going to just cycle through, make this request 5 times, and each request is going to be to a different model. So I just kind of specified a couple up here. One's going to run Llama 2 locally, one's going to run Mistral locally, and we're just going to pass in that base URL API key and the model that we want. Then we're going to do 2 serverless options, both through Together API. One's going to run Llama 2, one's going to run Mistral, and then one's going to run OpenAI the same way we normally would. And so if I run all of these, The local models take a little bit longer, so you have to wait a second. But here we go. I guess it wrote a pretty long one, or a series of haikus. So those will be probably the longest too. The serverless ones are going to be really quick. So here we go. I ran two local, I ran two serverless, and then finally the OpenAI serverless. So that's really easy. So the exact same request with just a couple of, extra parameters here or overrides completely change where that request is being made. And then finally, also with LangChain, we can just use the chat OpenAI request that we would normally use. And this is how you do the overrides here. So OpenAI API base, pass in that model, or the base URL we're interested in. We override the API key with whatever we're going to use, and the model name with whatever we're going to use. And so the same thing, we can make this work now just the same. We're going to run through all 5 of those different models, and it's going to show that the chat OpenAI works. And the reason this is interesting is because, a lot of us are using a framework probably for actually interacting with the LLMs. It does a lot of extra kind of error handling and stuff that we don't need to then try to build ourselves. And I can also swap into an agent here. So I demoed this last week on a deep dive of how the LangGraph agents work. But you can now kind of swap in either as your kind of agent brain. You can use one of these different LLMs now, or one of the tools individually. So the setup's going to be the same. I just kind of specified all these because I want to demo what it all, what each of these probably looks like. But if we look through how the agent is set up, I'm just same thing, giving it a way to get weather. I'm giving it a way to calculate the difference between different weathers, or sorry, difference between different temperatures. And then I'm telling it that I expect it to respond in a certain way. And the way this agent works is really dumb. You just say, here are a couple different cities, which is hottest and how much is it hotter than by the others. But the brains here, your helpful assistant, this is where we can swap in any one of these. And I just kind of have it as a couple different here just so I could easily toggle between them. But this is the option for requesting. Let's see it here. If we wanted to use OpenAI, they all use chat OpenAI. If we use OpenAI, we're just going to pass in our normal URL, normal API key, and a normal model. And this would probably work perfectly. Let me just now comment the others out. If we run the entire agent, go down and see our output, got actions happening, agent calling, actions, agent calling, and hopefully at the very end, we can see that Austin, Texas is the warmest. It's 15 degrees warmer than these other cities, so that worked perfectly. Now remember, if we use Ollama here, we're going to pass in the base URL, the Ollama API key, and specify some model that I'm using locally. So I'm going to use a Llama 2 version. If we run this, it cannot handle the tool calling out of the box. So this one is going to just call the agent and give a response. So you can see it's not going to be good yet for kind of the brains of the operation. So if it has to make tool calling, you're going to want to use not Ollama yet. They probably will support it soon, but today it won't work. So you can see it just goes straight to agent and we're done. But now we can do the, oops, scrolled too far. We can do one of these serverless options. Don't need to comment this out, but we will. And so I left 3 options here because these are the 3 that do support tool calling. So we can just kind of, use one of them. So we'll use Mistral first. But again, we just override the base URL, the API key, set the model that we're interested in. We down here just kind of pass in the tools and bind it to the LLM so it has access to those tools. If I run the entire thing, we'll see how Mistral works. It's going to be slower because it's on my machine, so that's something to be aware of. So if you're working with sensitive data or something, you'll probably want to use one of these local models, or you can also kind of not self-host, you can host through one of these serverless options, kind of your own instances. So you can kind of, I think, have that privacy if you're interested in it, but you will pay more than using one of the public models like we're doing today. So here we go. It was successfully called an action, called an agent. The problem is I've noticed a lot of these Mistral and Mistral not as good. It's going to make a tool call for get weather. Oh, actually, this one might have pulled off successfully. We'll see if it's available in Langsmith. Langsmith has been a little slow today. Very slow. Yeah, none of my new ones are showing up here. So we'll jump back over and see what the response was. Wow, I don't know what happened here. So it kind of drifted. And I find that is the case with some of these models here. If we do the same thing with the 7 billion parameter instruct model with Mistral, this one I think has been a little bit more successful for me. Okay, so it's got some actions, some agents, and we'll see if it has a, it's got some tool calling. Get the end result here. No, it just returned 48. So it doesn't nail it, but it's really cool that you can just swap these out really interchangeably at this point. So you're not going to be kind of locked in as these open models just get better and better. You're going to be able to swap things in. It's going to be a lot cheaper. There's a lot of competition in the serverless space. So they're basically doing things right now almost like at cost or even probably below cost just to get customers and bring them into some of their ecosystem where other things are probably more expensive. So using their kind of public hosted models is a really inexpensive way to be running these things. It's going to be a lot faster than running your own locally. But you do have some of those downsides. You know, OpenAI still is kind of the gold standard. They've got really good support. And I'll have to experiment with, you know, if you're using Gemini or if you're using Hugging Face, how those swap out. So it depends which ones you're using. But if you're using OpenAI right now, um, it's going to be incredibly easy to kind of retrofit your application and do whatever you want with any of these models and swap them out. So I use these for some of the actual tool calling I'm going to do, or when I call a tool, I'm going to use probably serverless most of the time. If I'm, or sorry, when it is a tool being used, I'm using serverless. So if it's just kind of like generating text or something, I'll do that. But if I'm expecting tool outputs, um, I will I will use still one of the GPT versions. So that's kind of my setup, but super cool. Glad that Ollama is now supporting OpenAI as well. And we're just kind of moving into an interesting future where you can just interchange models so easily. This is going to be really awesome. Anyway, thanks for watching. You can check out GitHub code. It's all here if you want to play around with it yourself. See you next time.